Hi everyone! Welcome to tonight's Facebook Live. I am doing Stars with the Stars, and tonight's feature is going to be Larry Hagman. So I'm going to give it a second for some people to get on. See if we can get anybody on tonight's live. And let's check that I am live. Okay. Good stuff. Okay, so I'm going to kind of get started here. So tonight's Facebook Live, I am doing tonight's Facebook Live, Stars with the Stars, which is an astrology walkthrough series that I'm doing where I'm going over different celebrity charts. So far, I've done Jeffree Star, the beauty YouTuber. I've done Barbara Eden. This week, I want to do Larry Hagman, who is the co-star in the I Dream of Jeannie series, and definitely the counterpart to Barbara Eden's character in that series. He's also done a lot of other things. He was on a very popular show called Dallas, a TV show called Dallas. I've just kind of filtered this for I Dream of Jeannie because I love I Dream of Jeannie, and I just thought it'd be super fun to talk about Larry Hagman because obviously he had to have an interesting set of energies to complement Barbara Eden for them to have such great chemistry, right, on the show, and also the type of person that he was and some of the kind of stories that have floated around about how he was on the set of I Dream of Jeannie. And also just, again, the time he was born. He was actually born in the same year as Barbara Eden, but has a very different set of energies and a different personality archetype than Barbara Eden does. And yeah, there's just so much always to talk about with astrology, so it's definitely an exciting thing. And if you're watching this and you're new to my channel or learning about my work, I'm a certified angel card reader as well as a professional astrologer, and I do professional astrology readings as well as angel card readings, and then soul coaching, which is when I combine my work in astrology with my work in angel card readings to support people to heal and move through blocks in their life. So this is just a really fun series that I am doing on alternate weeks when we don't have a new or full moon, and we are on one of those weeks. I was going to say something else and then lost track of what I was going to say. So Larry Hagman. So he was born on September 21st, 1931 in Fort Worth, Texas. He's actually a Virgo, woot woot Virgo power, a very late degree Virgo, so he's cuspy between Virgo and Libra. His moon is in Aquarius, his ascendant is in Aquarius, his midheaven is in Scorpio. Hi Brandy, so good to see you. So tonight I'm doing Larry Hagman, who is the counterpart to Barbara Eden in I Dream of Jeannie. So I'm sure you'll be excited about that as I am. So was just going over his birth data. So again, he was born right at the cusp of Virgo and Libra in Fort Worth, Texas. He was actually born in the same year as Barbara Eden, but as I'm going to get further into, has very different energy than her. So you can see his chart here. Beautiful chart, very complex, lots of things going on. You know, just at first glance as an astrologer, I look and I see that there's a lot of energy in different places, which definitely can indicate like a healthier chart because that means that the person can express energy in lots of different ways. We also see some really positive aspects here as well as some tense aspects. So a nice combination of all of that. However, with that being said, I think I talked about this in the last Stars with the Stars. If you have a pileup of planets, or maybe it wasn't a Stars with the Stars, I think it was actually the full moon in Pisces. I was talking about this. If you hear me pause, it's because I'm probably taking a sip of tea. When we have a pileup of energy localized to like one or two parts of the astrology wheel, of the zodiac wheel, it it just means that there's a lot of hyper-focused energy in those areas. And if you try to fight the energy of those areas, you'll have much more challenging time because you don't have energy to pull from anywhere else. But if you're able to work those energies and work them well, you'll be able to achieve a lot of mastery in those areas. So I have seen really prominent singers. I'm thinking of a particular singer that has a really strong pileup of like Scorpio energy in her chart. She might be an interesting person to do stars with the stars for at one point. So a pileup of energy in localized places versus a more scattered chart doesn't necessarily mean automatically good or bad. It really depends upon the person, how they're able to integrate the energies, what transits they're under. You know, in astrology, there's a lot of variables that are involved. So we can't really make kind of snap decisions or snap judgments about a chart being inherently good or bad. And that's where having an astrologer that can translate for you and work through the energies, explaining them to you, can really be of service. So again, Larry Hagman, and like I said, he was in a lot more of television and media than just I Dream of Jeannie. He was also on this very popular television show for a long time called Dallas, which is interesting because he was actually born in Texas. So that might have been a bit faded, but definitely for the sake of kind of continuing this theme with I Dream of Jeannie, you know, I want to talk about his chart and think about his time on I Dream of Jeannie, as well as, if we have time, even look at the synastry or the compatibility that he had to Barbara Eden. So good stuff. I'm just checking on my phone how quickly. Okay, so we're just lagging like a couple seconds behind what I'm doing. That's good. What else do I want to say about Larry Hagman? So some things I think will come up as I go over the chart. But Larry Hagman was, in my opinion, a fantastic actor on the series. He's, you know, definitely portrayed in a certain type of way. He has a particular archetype, his character, which is kind of like this nervous, frantic astronaut that's just trying to kind of keep up appearances while he has this like bubbly, sexy, fun, who can give him whatever he wants genie, but he doesn't want whatever he wants. Like, he doesn't want to get whatever he wants. He's actually more stubborn and kind of complex in certain ways, in the fact that he, unlike, you know, his friend Roger Healy, doesn't necessarily want everything that Jeannie has to offer him. You know, he a lot of times is almost fighting to have this like normal life, you know. So let's see if in the chart there's some things that kind of, you know, can come in with that. And feel free to, you know, leave comments if there's questions that you have or areas that you want me to explain further as I'm going into this. So again, this is his chart here, and I've gone and plugged this into astro.com. So we're going to look at the more advanced version of his chart on astro.com here. So as we said, he's an Aquarius ascendant, midheaven in Scorpio. What? Contrary to what this said, no, midheaven in Scorpio. Aquarius ascendant, midheaven in Scorpio. His IC is at the final degrees of Taurus, and his descendant is in Leo. Oh my God, and he has Jupiter on his descendant just like I do. Wow. No wonder I really like this person. Also really interesting, he has his moon in the 12th house, which I also have. So it's definitely funny how we're drawn to certain people and to look up about their energy, especially as an astrologer. I find this a lot. I'm always learning by looking at other people's energies and understanding how intelligent our intuition is, because we're guided to things that are really of service to us, you know. So having the moon in the 12th house, I have this placement, so I can definitely attest to this. And he also has it in an air sign, which I also have. My moon is in Libra in the 12th house. This means that your emotions and your feelings are not always immediately apparent to you. And especially when the moon is in an air sign, this means that you have to sometimes talk out what you're going through in order to actually access your feelings. It's like you have to go through the mind before you can actually access the heart, in a way, or you have to go through the head or the mind in order to access like the deeper subconscious. When the moon is in the 12th house, this is already a Piscean house. This is a subconscious house. So this means that the emotions and the feelings can be very buried. It can take even longer for those emotions to come up to the surface, because this is the house that's ruled by Pisces and Neptune. So it's literally like whatever planets are here can kind of be buried underwater. They're not as easily accessed or as conscious as they would be if they were in the first house, which is the house of Aries, the self. So definitely he was very sensitive, very empathic. And I would say that he was very sensitive and very empathic about what the society or the groups or communities around him might have been feeling. Now, as to whether or not he was compassionate to actually act upon what he felt is a different story, because I'll share some things about what I noticed about his midheaven and his IC and how that kind of links to some stories that I've read about him being on set. So we also have Saturn in his 12th house, Saturn in Capricorn. So unfortunately, Larry Hagman has transitioned. He's already passed away. Just shutting my window here. But if he was alive today, he would actually be going through his third Saturn return, which in fact his co-star Barbara Eden, who is alive, she is going through her third Saturn return because Saturn's transiting through this part of the zodiac right now, through Capricorn. So having Saturn in the 12th house, you know, definitely adds to this element of hidden energy again. But Saturn, which is the planet of hard work and responsibility and karma, when that gets put in the 12th house, it means that sometimes your work or the areas that you need to be focused on growing and developing within are not immediately apparent to you. It might take you a little bit longer to get caught up to speed with what those areas are that need work. And just shutting my blinds here, it's gotten dark so fast. So there's this hidden element to kind of like this, the karmic work that you have to do. However, on an emotional, intuitive level, somebody with Saturn in the 12th house, they have this almost like psychic awareness of where they maybe need to apply themselves to do the work. So that's interesting, you know. Saturn in the 12th is a little bit like having Saturn retrograde, meaning that it's not a Saturn that's at full strength, but it is different than having Saturn in retrograde because they're different energies. Saturn in retrograde, which, by the way, we just came out of the Saturn retrograde. Saturn went direct in the astrology, the current astrology, yesterday. Saturn in retrograde means that Saturn is looking backwards. It's not at its full strength, you know, to move forward. It's sort of like the gears are in reverse, and you have to kind of pedal reverse a little bit before you can pedal forward. Having Saturn in the 12th house has a little bit of similarity to that, but not necessarily the same, because it's one of those things with the 12th house where, because it's subconscious, once you make what's in the 12th house that is usually unconscious or subconscious known, once you bring it to the light and make it conscious, then you can work with it. So it's really a difference of it being hidden instead of it being like not fully up to speed. So once you're able to access it and become aware of it, then you can really work it. So this tells me that he had to, you know, his work being born into a Saturn in Capricorn is about restructuring. And this is also, being in the 12th house, could be a lot of karmic energy, having to do restructuring or building of structures that maybe even out some of his karmic debt, you could say, and or also spiritually. He might have had to do a lot of work around being spiritually minded or being sensitive or being compassionate. But this would have really come up in the work environment in his career because Capricorn is related to career. So, and then of course we could look at how that Saturn is aspected and how some of these things are aspected to determine more about it, you know? So definitely important that his moon and his Saturn are in the 12th house. And I want to kind of jump here to his midheaven. So his midheaven being at 29 degrees of Scorpio is a pretty intense placement, because anytime we are at the 0 or the 29th degree of a sign, it's an edgy sign. It's either like the infant stage of that sign or the grandpa stage of that sign, meaning that we're just at the beginning of integrating that energy in this lifetime, or we're at the fullest capacity and we almost have maximized all of the energy of it. So it's like on overdrive. So having his midheaven at 29 Scorpio means that he could come across publicly as very intense, very, there could be also like a sexual component to this, but also just very intense, very intensely emotional, very passionate, which when we're translating that into acting, that's a great thing to have, because when you're acting, you are actually translating emotions, and great actors are able to translate emotions in a way that makes it believable for people to actually feel the way that they're putting that out. So I found a lot of really successful or good, I'm putting that in air quotes, actors and actresses have some type of emotional or Neptunian influence on either their ascendant or their midheaven, could also be the descendant, but in particular the ascendant and the midheaven. I find people with like the moon close to their ascendant or their midheaven or a Neptunian influence or even like a water energy, they're really representing those emotions and those energies, and that is very powerful when it comes to movies, television, film, because that is ruled by more of the emotions, more of Neptune's realm. So there's definitely an energy here of him being very intense, very emotional, which I would bet that he was able to channel that into his acting work, which made him very successful. I know that the TV show Dallas was a lot about this. I haven't actually watched it, so I may stand corrected, but from what I understand preliminarily, it's a lot about this man who was kind of like an oil tycoon, and kind of like the ins and outs and all of the kind of the interesting, dirty things that went on behind the scenes of him running that business and kind of bringing it up to scale and all the things that go on. So that would have been a perfect expression for him of some of this energy, which is kind of like the secrets and the hidden and the intense, right? I Dream of Jeannie is a much more playful show, but if you look at his character, he is able to convey a lot of complex feelings and emotion, and there is definitely like this underlying theme in the show about, to an extent, submission and dominance, control, being controlled. These are all things that are Pluto's realm, control, which is Scorpio. Scorpio is co-ruled by Mars and Pluto, so we can definitely see the connections there. Now, I also want to talk about the fact that Barbara Eden wrote a book, and other people have said that he wasn't exactly the easiest person to get along with, on the set. He was prone to being very moody or jealous of people that he perceived to be potentially more famous or stealing the limelight than him, and could be almost like possessive of his fame, and then almost like lash out or act really inappropriately on the set, doing very like inappropriate things, almost like childlike behavior, to lash out because he had this disdain for things either not going his way or feeling like people were upstaging him. And this has been kind of spoken about by several people, and Barbara Eden in particular has talked about it in her book, and how at times when other guest stars would be coming on the show, that she would sometimes have to be kind of like smoothing it over, or like smoothing tension or ties, and assuring people that would guest star on the show that it would be temporary, or his moods would subside, or to kind of avoid him when he's being moody. So definitely there's that, intense aspect with the midheaven at the final degree of Scorpio. Also, his IC, which rules his inner world, is at the final degree of Taurus, and this region right here is actually where we have a very particular fixed star that can be related to kind of like losing your head, losing your mind, being very intense. But the other thing about this is that this axis, or these degrees, the 29th degree of Taurus, 27 to 29 degrees of Taurus, and the final degrees of Scorpio, are just a very intense, powerful like point of energy. So it's about understanding how to transform that energy and how to harness it and utilize it in a powerful way. It's almost like Kundalini energy or sexual energy. Understanding how to alchemize that and transform it into something powerful and good. So if I could place a bet, it would be that he probably had a lot of energy and was trying to figure out how to channel that energy. And I definitely feel like in his work and his acting, he was able to do that. But I think in his private life or his personal life, he might have struggled with that more. You know, and we can look at things like his moon in the 12th house, his emotions being hidden to him. The moon in Aquarius is a very positive placement for the moon when it comes to having friendships and social circles, but it creates this like moon Uranus aspect where sometimes the person feels disconnected or like emotionally unaware of how they feel. So there could be this element there where sometimes he didn't understand how he was feeling, and then he had difficulty accessing those feelings in, like, his feelings were buried, which is the moon in the 12th house, but then his feelings also bizarrely at the same time felt disconnected from him. So in the ways where he might have maybe needed to feel empathy or compassion, he really had trouble accessing that. So that could contribute to him not understanding how his behaviors were influencing or affecting other people. And then if we look at his descendant, which is in Leo, this is the sign of the self, right, of drama. So, and we also have Jupiter on the descendant. So this is expanding and inflating that sense of drama, which again is great for the profession that he was in, acting, but could also inflate this dramatic energy with his relationships with other people, because the descendant is one-on-one interactions with another person, right? So people could be very much perceiving him as over dramatic or all about himself or like very selfish, you know, because of the Jupiter influence, which is expanding it. Now, Jupiter and the descendant, I actually have this in my chart. It's definitely an interesting aspect to have. It means that you really expand through your connections with other people, through the relationships and the partnerships that you form and the connections, the one-on-one interactions you have with other people. You really learn a lot from those interactions when you're with other people. So, you know, and he also has his moon in Aquarius, so connection to other people was very important to him emotionally, even if he had trouble understanding why or how. You know, so I would bet that this was also another theme of his life, was understanding how to channel that leadership and that individuality and that drama as an actor, but then also trying to belong to a group of people and understand how to connect with other people and be emotionally sensitive to other people's needs. I think that these would have been really big themes in his life, you know. If we look at some of his personal planets, his inner planets, he has Mercury in Virgo, so very precise with his communications, which definitely would have been an asset on the show, because on the show there was a lot of precise technical things that needed to happen. I was watching this interview Barbara Eden talking about just recently where she had said that, you know, a lot of the sudden changes that would occur on the show where she would blink and somebody would have a change of clothes would actually require the actors to freeze, and that not everybody's capable of doing that because they'd have to freeze because they didn't have the technology in the 1960s like we have now, right? So the actors themselves would actually have to freeze while adjustments were made and then return to the exact same position. So required a lot of precision, you know, and Mercury in Virgo is a very intellectual mind, a very precise mind, very analytical, very precise and humorous in the way that it's precise. So I think that that all really contributed to the show very well. In fact, he and I actually have the same Mercury within 2 degrees of each other, which is pretty fun. He has his sun on literally the last couple of days of Virgo. He has his sun conjunct Venus. So this brings in an element of beauty and attractiveness, which you can definitely see that he was an attractive, you know, an attractive guy, and that this also, you know, helps the show because Barbara Eden's also very beautiful. So they're 2 beautiful co-stars, you know. And then we also have here Venus conjunct the South Node in kind of a wider orb. It's about 4 degrees. So, you know, Venus conjunct the South Node is not exactly fun. Now, he does have Venus in Libra, early Libra, so that's home placement for Venus. It's a beautiful placement for Venus. But he has this in the 8th house, which is the house of Scorpio. So this is adding a little bit of a more intense element to his relationships and his connections with other people, which actually complements what I was talking about with his midheaven, you know, at the end of Scorpio. And then he's also got Venus conjunct South Node. So Jeffree Star, I believe, had this in his chart, but I think that his Venus was in Scorpio, if I'm not mistaken. Definitely go back and rewatch the Stars with the Stars for that one. But Venus conjunct the South Node is like, oh, it's not exactly fun. You know, it's attracting very karmic relationships. It's sometimes getting stuck in relationship patterns of the past, you know, so this could have been like overly attaching to people or people pleasing at a more extreme level, because Venus in Libra conjuncts South Node, and interesting, he has South Node in Libra and his North Node is in Aries, and that's also my South Node, North Node. So yet another reason I can relate to him. And Barbara Eden had the same thing, North Node in Aries, South Node in Libra, so they had some things in common there. Also, if you notice, his dark moon Lilith, which is like the repressed feminine aspect, that's actually exactly conjunct his North Node in Aries. So this is more intense energy, and this is in the second house, which is the house of Taurus, a fixed house. So yeah, I definitely see some elements here in the energy about why he could have been perceived as very intense, but paradoxically, I think that actually his desires were a lot about feeling disconnected and wanting to figure out where he belonged. And I think that acting was definitely one of the places where he felt like he could channel his energies and belong. But I think he struggled even within acting to understand at times how to work with his co-stars, you know, in a way that was balanced between the group, versus his own needs, you know. And maybe was acting out a lot of repressed or past life patterns that he might have done in relationships where he was maybe controlling or trying to exert control when really he needed to kind of let go more, you know. We also have Mars in Scorpio, which is an exalted Mars. So this gives him also a lot of energy and strength, a lot of pushing energy, right? Which we also have this in tight square to his moon sign. So Mars square moon is harsh, you know. That means that a lot of times he feels like there's aggressive energy put upon him. So sometimes people that have Mars square moon, they feel irritated more easily, they feel frustrated more easily because they're not emotionally getting their needs met. There's like antagonistic energy on their need to feel safe and secure. So sometimes when people are under this influence, they can really lash out or act out of the kind of like repressed or like frustration that they're feeling on a subconscious level all the time, you know. And because he's got Mars in the 9th house, that's a Jupiterian house, so this could be expanding that influence, you know. But ultimately, he probably had to learn a lot about his Mars, because this is also a house of higher learning. So probably over time, as I was saying, he probably had to learn how to channel these really intense energies that he could tap into, you know. So definitely some interesting things here. He also has Mars sextile Neptune. So emotionally, he might have understood at this kind of like psychic level the actions that he might have needed to take in his career, maybe where would be appropriate to place himself or encourage other people. I know I had read something where the actor that plays his best friend, Roger Healy, that they were considering someone else, and it was actually Larry Hagman who said, no, I think it should be this guy, you know, and that's the guy that they went with. And obviously I'm so glad they did, because he's a great counterpart in the show. So it's like things like that where he could intuitively tap in and almost encourage other people, hey, I think you should take this action, you know. If we look at some of this energy at the end of Virgo, including his Venus in early Libra, that actually sextiles down to, or sorry, trines down to his Chiron in Taurus. So Chiron is the wounded element, the part of us that needs healing. So for him, this was in the 3rd house, which is the mind and communications, and this is in the sign of Taurus. So for sure, he might have felt sometimes like he wasn't feeling valued, and I think that that could also be why he might have lashed out at people sometimes. The root cause was actually about not feeling valued. So, you know, Leo and Taurus kind of have similar things there, where it's like they do square each other, but they have this common aspect of wanting to be appreciated. It's just that Leo wants to be appreciated for its creativity and its presence, just literally being there. Taurus wants to be appreciated for its worth, what it has to offer, the kind of the wealth or the things that it's done, when it's amassed, you know, and it owns that. So they both can at times carry this energy of control, because they're all on the same axis, right? Scorpio, Aquarius, Leo, and Taurus, they all square each other. So they all are dealing with kind of how to play with society and control, but in different ways, you know? And yeah, so I think that there was a wound there where he felt maybe undervalued, but this could also be a stubbornness too, because it's in the third house, which is of the mind. So sometimes him having to heal himself through loosening his grip on needing control or letting go of stubbornness. And I think that some of his energy in Virgo, like his Mercury and his Sun, would have helped him out with that, because ultimately he would recognize, like, okay, if it's not being of service to other people for me to act or do or behave this way, then maybe I need to kind of change myself a bit here. And because Virgo is mutable earth, Virgo has a much more flexible way to change its mindset and its behaviors than some of the other earth signs, because Taurus is fixed earth and Capricorn is cardinal earth. So they're a little bit less flexible in being able to change their habits and behaviors and ways of being than Virgo would be. What else do I want to talk about? He also has Uranus square Pluto. This would have been a generational aspect. What else? We can see here that his Saturn is pretty tightly within 2 degrees square his Uranus. So definitely, you know, it's so interesting too, because he's got Uranus and Aries, and we just, you know, came out of the Uranus and Aries transit. So I've been doing a lot of research lately about like the late 1960s, and I'm just so drawn to that decade and studying it astrologically. So I find it interesting to look at the energy that people that were born into being prominent in the 1960s, and also how that kind of compares to like what's happening now, you know. But I think overall, I talked a lot about in Barbara Eden's chart the 1960s and the time that the show premiered and how perfect it was, because it's a very Uranian type of show, right? It's very out there, very different, and you know, very odd humor, but kind of like sudden and random humor too, which is very Uranian, and how perfect it was for Barbara Eden to step into that role based on the astrology that was around at that time, like 1965. So if we look at Larry Hagman's chart, we can see some similar influences, because he's an Aquarius ascendant, which means that he's ruled by Uranus. So Uranus is definitely associated with all that energy that I was just talking about, right? Like also in Barbara Eden's chart in the time the show premiered, very Uranian. And then also because his moon in Aquarius, this gives him also this Uranian element where his sense of humor, the way that he feels safe or emotionally connects to things, is through this Uranian element of society and the way that people are and things like that. And those are all elements that are really explored in the show, you know. Because ultimately, Jeannie is really like this outsider that comes into kind of this very like quote unquote normal world in Cocoa Beach, Florida, and really just disrupts it, but also at the same time provides a lot of like genius things and ingenuity and like sudden sparks of innovation, and all of that is very Uranian. It's a disruptive type of energy, but it disrupts you in a way that kind of like shakes up your world. Sometimes it's very stressful because it can feel unstable, but at the same time really like changes your life, you know? So he was definitely on board with this energy. You could see it in his chart. He complements the energy of the time that the show premiered really well based on what's in his chart. So I'm pretty much nearing kind of the end of this Stars with the Stars here, but I do want to do a quick synastry chart of Barbara Eden with Larry Hagman. So let's do that for fun. Sure, I got some things here. There we go. So here's a synastry chart of Larry Hagman and Barbara Eden. So obviously this is a very complex chart. This would take me a lot longer than the couple minutes that I'm gonna kind of highlight a couple things to go over with everybody, but I want to talk about a couple things. So we could see that Barbara Eden's moon in Capricorn actually lands in his 11th house, which is actually the house of Aquarius, and his moon sign natally is in Aquarius. So this definitely adds this kind of like spontaneous, disruptive element, which is something that his moon sign would already be aligned with. So there's a little bit of a common ground there, kind of a playful common ground there. Even though her moon was in Capricorn, which is adjacent to Aquarius and very different than Aquarius, her moon landing in his 11th house would definitely add some kind of common ground there, you know. And I know that Barbara Eden was born in Leo, but you can also see that they do have a lot of personal planet energy that's close to each other because they were born in the same year, right? So their Jupiters are close to each other, their Plutos are close to each other, their Saturns are close to each other, their Uranus are close to each other, their Chirons are close to each other, right? So when people are born close in age, they have a lot of the same outer planets. Now, how those outer planets are aspected, that could be very different from chart to chart because of the sun sign and all of the other aspects that come into play that move more quickly than the outer planets. But people that are born close in age that have similar outer planets, that means that they'll really understand each other based on the generational things that they're going through. They don't have to like translate it or explain it to someone. So a lot of times I've found when there's gaps in age, that's where a lot more of the Plutonian influences or even Saturn or Uranus, but in particular, I found it with Saturn and Pluto, that when you have harsh aspects to someone with Saturn and Pluto, that can definitely contribute to power struggles or feeling oppressed or feeling depressed when you're around the person. And a lot of those transits move at a slower pace, especially Pluto. So when you're like about 6 years apart in age from someone, it's more likely you're going to have different outer planet placements than that person. Especially Saturn, because Saturn would have moved almost 3 times by 6 years apart, or 2 to 3 times, depends like where in the Saturn cycle the person was born. So yeah, it creates a lot of differences. When you're born close in age to someone, the outer planets are similar, and that means that you're working through similar issues in terms of Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, Chiron, as a usual rule, you know. So they definitely had that going on for them, which is great because definitely the energy of the 1960s was very distinct and different, you know, than other times in history, with Uranus and Pluto being in Virgo. So also we could look here that they both had Mercury in Virgo. Looks like, yep. So they both had Mercury in Virgo. So in terms of communication, they were able to communicate and understand one another pretty well. We could see that also, you know, that strength of that Mercury in Virgo, and they had Saturn in Capricorn, so that's trining it down to Pluto in Cancer. This is a sextile. So again, having those same outer planets is really supporting them here. Let's look at some ways that they were different, you know. So we can see here, I'm pretty sure inner chart is Larry Hagman. Yeah. So Larry Hagman here would show up at the end of Virgo, and Barbara Eden is basically at the end of Leo. So they're like roughly 30 degrees apart. You know, we can look here. So 27, 29, yeah, almost 30 degrees apart. Almost just one sign away from each other, you know. What else do I want to look at here? You know, they're pretty similar in certain ways, but yet also very different. Definitely the fact that his moon is in his 12th house. Where is her moon? Her moon was in her 6th house. So that's the house of Virgo, you know, so she was very consciously aware of her emotions and her patterns and what she needed to do and structure, because she has the moon in the 6th house, which is the house of Virgo, in the sign of Capricorn. So very grounded, very stable. If anything, she might have had moments where she was overly critical on herself, or maybe didn't give herself permission to feel her feelings. So interestingly, that's kind of like a little bit in common with Larry Hagman, because his emotions were disconnected from him. But he also was dealing with the fact that he was almost like inundated or overloaded with psychic information at times. And she didn't necessarily have that, but she did have a very Neptunian influence on her chart, from what I remember. So they have kind of like this push-pull energy with feeling emotions or being overloaded with emotions. They probably could relate to each other well about that. Looking at some of the harsh aspects here, you know, these would be generational. So Saturn opposed Pluto, Pluto square Uranus, Saturn square Uranus, because you can see that they're basically at the same placement. So those, of course, they count as aspects between each other, but because they're aspects that are already within their own charts, because it's generational, it's not something necessarily new to them. We can look here, so does look like his Venus at 1 degrees of Libra would be squaring within about a 4-degree orb of Barbara Eden's moon. So moon square Venus can be kind of tough. That's like the moon and Venus like to be together or in positive aspect with each other. So when they're squaring off, it means that, you know, there's tension or like frustration. So she might have been feeling like some of the ways that he acted with people, some of his relationship behaviors weren't necessarily good for business, right? So she was feeling responsible for like the sanctity or like preserving the business of what they were doing, the show. And he might have kind of been lost in maybe like poor relationship patterns or poor relationship behaviors that were either too people-pleasing or codependent, or, you know, it's interesting because he has some of that, but then he also has all that Leo energy, right? So I think that she was a lot of the times probably trying to preserve things or keep things grounded and safe, and he was kind of dealing with a lot of energy of his own. So there could be tension there, you know. And what else could we look at? Her Venus. So love that Sun conjunct Venus in Leo is the best. Her Venus is actually squaring over to Chiron, but again, that's a generational aspect, so that would be something within her chart. Let's see, I thought that, let's see. Her Venus is at, 24 degrees of Leo, and the Chiron was at 23 of Taurus, so that's pretty tight square. And I do remember talking about that in her Stars with the Stars. Also, we have this moon opposed Jupiter here, so his moon is actually opposing the placement of her Jupiter. So her Jupiter is at 8 degrees of Leo, and his moon sign is at 4 degrees of Aquarius. So this could be him at times resenting the ways in which maybe like she upstaged him, you know, and that could also be contributing to some of what I was talking about. Definitely this could be like overly inflating his emotions, which for the sake of the show is actually really good, because a lot of the show was about him overreacting or responding in emotion to the things that she was doing. So I think in the preservation of the show is actually a good thing. And probably much of this energy was channeled into the show, you know. But this could also be like this, it could be like this weird mirroring paradox where he cares about what other people think, but yet he's also got this Leo quality to himself where he wants to be the one that's like center stage. So he would like lash out on someone with other Leo energy if he felt like they were upstaging them out of this like desire to feel like things were more equal or representative fairly of like the group. But then paradoxically, he would do that to other people too, you know. So moon opposed Jupiter can create like an inflation of the moon because Jupiter expands. So it's just requiring you to like balance or temper it or kind of get it into alignment at times, you know. But again, as with anything in astrology, awareness is key. Once you're aware, you can begin to work the energy and you can heal it. It's when it's subconscious that you can't really work with it and heal it because you don't really know what's going on and you're acting out subconsciously or unconsciously. So I think this is a good place to stop. Bit of a longer Stars with the Stars tonight, but I was getting into some kind of intense and interesting subconscious patterns there with his chart. I love his character. I love Barbara Eden. I love My Dream of Jeannie. And I think that he played the role so well. I always enjoy watching him, you know, so I have nothing but love for Larry Hagman and Barbara Eden. And I am grateful for you watching this in its entirety. If you caught this live, if you're watching this on replay, or if you're watching this on my YouTube, enjoy, welcome, all the things. And I look forward to doing more Stars with the Stars soon. Much love, and thanks for watching.